Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar from Spec Innovations, Verify and Validate the System Lifecycle. My name is Taylor Duffy, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. First, I'd like to go over some housekeeping. During the presentation, feel free to send us questions, and we'll get them answered in the Q&A part of the webinar. You can also interact with us on LinkedIn through the Innoslate users group or through Twitter using the handle @SpecInnovations. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you after the live presentation, so keep an eye out for it in your inbox. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our presenter, Spec Innovations President and Founder, Dr. Stephen Dam. Dr. Dam has been involved with research, experiments, operations analysis, software development, systems engineering, and training for more than 40 years. He has also received an Expert Systems Engineering Professional, ESEP certification from INCOSE. He is currently applying systems engineering techniques to various DoD, DOE, and commercial projects. Feel free to send him any questions through the LinkedIn users group or send him an email to steven.dam@specinnovations.com. And now I'll hand over the controls to Dr. Dam and we'll get started.
Thanks, Taylor. So let's talk about today's agenda. So first of all, we've got to start off with what is V&V. Sorry, I'm going to do a very short thing on that. I won't overwhelm. Hopefully most everybody who's listening knows about it. Then I'm going to talk a little about this T&E continuum concept, which I think is very interesting and something we're trying to implement. And then why an ontology is needed to help support that. And a little bit about why we think LML, of course, is the right ontology. And of course, how does it aid in integrating T&E with digital engineering? That's always a big topic these days. And talking about then how can we implement the language and how does it provide for the continuum? So let's get started. So first of all, we got to ground everybody. What is verification validation? Well, if you do what I like to do is go check Google real quick and see what it says. You get these definitions and they pretty much look the same thing. They're treating them almost like synonyms. And so, but you know, however, you know, DoD and many other organizations, particularly in the federal government, look at it very differently. So verification is separate, and it's meant to be looking at the specification level requirements. You know, what did we tell you to go off and buy or build? And provides, you know, some kind of solution dependent requirements being satisfied, making sure they've met that requirement. And then also prove that the solution is being built according to that agreed set of requirements. So again, those are the kinds of things you're trying to do. And again, the typical term for this is developmental test and evaluation. DT&E is used very, very commonly. For validation, we're looking at more, does it really meet the need? What was the user need? And does it really apply for that? So particularly to have the customer and stakeholder, are they happy? Are they satisfied? Operational suitability is one of the things that we look at in OT&E, particularly operational test and evaluation. So that's a key part of that whole aspect of things. And so again, this is looking usually at the big system of systems kind of level interactions, might include live testing or even training exercises involved with something like this. So this gets to be a lot bigger. And you can see it really focuses on it. We find this in the microcosm of Innoslate. We have the software developers do their testing, their developmental testing, and they go test things. And then we have the systems engineers come in and do operational testing. And does it really meet the use suitability needs of the system engineer? So what's this test and evaluation as a continuum concept? Well, Chris Collins and Ken Sechnow published a very interesting article in the ITEA journal. If you're not familiar with that, there's a link here for it. We make that available. And in there, they talk about critical change in how test and evaluation support capability delivery. And the idea is to have this kind of continuum of using test and evaluation throughout the life cycle to help you inform the development and fielding of decisions. And so there's different aspects of that, as you see here. Model-based environment is one of the enablers of the continuum. The bottom middle part, you see that in the diagram. But the basic concept is we need to be thinking about tests early in the life cycle and all the way through it. So how can we implement the concept? Well, to do this, you need to understand what data is being collected during the test and evaluation that influences these early decisions. And to do that, you really need some kind of ontology, some way to say, here's the set of data I need, information types of data, and then how they're related to one another. And that's basically an ontology. So when you think about that taxonomy and relationships that make up ontology, gives us a language for communications and easily make it easier to express things. But developing one is hard. If you've ever actually had to sat down and try to do one from scratch, it's very difficult. When you see a lot of the work you see going on with SysML, for example, a lot of that is looking at ontology, trying to come up with the right set of terms and how these things work with each other. And the thing we recognize is each discipline has their own language. And one of the difficulties of systems engineering is we're supposed to speak all those languages. We have to be able to talk to the electrical engineers, the mechanical engineers, human systems interface development, all these things, all these areas that are critical. Software, of course, very different language. So again, it certainly can look a lot like the Tower of Babel out there. So why choose LML? Well, first of all, LML has been around since 2013. It provides a very simple ontology that covers systems engineering and program management. So it already gives you a lot of the NDs, relationships, attributes you need for this. And here's the set that's there. There's kind of a documentation model, which is the artifact is the container of the statements and requirements in particular. There's a functional model where you have actions and inputs and outputs, and physical model with the assets and conduits, connecting the assets. And then a parametric and program model that has some of those other factors that you need to capture. Your metrics, your measures, location is a very important factor, right? Cost, risk, decisions, time. All these are critical factors that you might want to be capturing as you're going through this and doing that development. They are all related to one another. There's a pretty, you can't read that, of course, because it's really 11 by 17. It's how you print it out. But it really shows it. Virtually everything's connected to everything, at least with one relationship, if not multiple relationships. And there's different purposes for the different types of relationships as well, the different relationships. So this is where the complexity comes in. And oh, by the way, those relationships can have attributes as well on them, which means you really have a very complete language. The entity classes represent the nouns of the language. The relationships are the verbs. And then so attributes on the nouns, of course, are like an adjective, and attributes on relationships are like an adverb. So again, a very strong language. It's actually a little more than just ontology with LML. They also recommend a few diagram types as basic. It doesn't mean that you're limited to this. This is just the minimum set you probably need. You need some kind of behavioral diagram, and they've created this thing called the action diagram. In there, there's no symbology for constructs. There's instead a special type of the action, which represents the loop or the or a sync point. Very simple, as simple as it could be made, and still give you the logic you need to really do the analysis you're trying to do. Another is the asset diagram. That's your physical diagram. That's the boxes and lines connecting with each other. Maybe you want to add pictures for the different assets. That's a common thing to do. In Innoslate, you can actually change the line types and put lightning bolts, ones and zeros, and things like that in there, and a background as well. So you can really make it look very neat. And then the spider diagram for traceability. So those are the three primary mandatory diagrams from LML, but you're not limited to those. The fact that you have all these other diagram types, the 9 SysML diagram types are all very interesting, can be useful. There are many other types though. I have zeros and square charts, you name it. You can go on, and you want to be able to visualize all the information in as many different ways as you can. The current version, by the way, is 1.4. It was released back in October 2022. 1.5 is under development. That's going to have a mapping to SysML v2 and BPMN. Anyway, so each of the versions, extensions had appendices that did things like, for DODAF and the original SysML v1.x, there was extensions for that. So again, that's how this specification has been being developed. And I just mentioned this 1.5 will bring in the SysML v2 and BPMN mapping. So why choose LML? Again, version 1.2 was released back in March of 2022. Again, we actually accelerated the process of quite a bit during that time period. And by the way, if I didn't mention it, it is an open standard. Go to lifecyclemodeling.org. You can go download it for free. It's a completely open standard, and it is not, so it's not proprietary to Spec Innovations or anybody. It's meant to be for everybody to use. Anyway, so in this version that was released back in March 2022, basically it came from users using it over the years and saying, hey, this is a good way to set up. And we prototyped this capability in Innoslate as well. Actually, with this particular release, they added the concept of verification requirement actually as well. That was not something we'd done much with in Innoslate before this release. So we did add that in one of the later releases of the tool. We also, the idea of calling test case versus verification event, there's a lot of confusion a little bit between people. Systems engineers want to call it a verification event. The software engineers want to call it a test case. I don't care. Call it whatever you like. It's still a type of action. It's a subclass of action. So that's nice and has information that you capture the actual results, the expected results, status tracking, things like that you need to do for test cases. The test suite is the container for it. Of course, we use artifacts as containers. So again, this kind of extends that documentation model we saw in the previous diagram, the previous chart. So this now is another way to use that capability to create a new type of documentation, which is the test suite. And I mentioned the verification requirement briefly. So that has some different attributes than the regular requirement. In fact, it doesn't have the quality attributes that the regular requirement has. So that was determined not necessarily for the verification requirement. So anyway, how does it aid in integrating T&E with digital engineering? Well, again, these extensions allow us to take the requirements and other aspects of the lifecycle model together and bring them all together in one place. And of course, you can add your own relationships as well if that helps you searching and reporting, creating reports. So again, here's a simplified spider diagram showing I have in the center a test case. I only know that because I use the acronym TC to mean test case. And so it verifies a verification requirement, again, using the acronym VR. It's related to a conduct helium tank inspection that would be done separately, perhaps. Again, that's something that was created there. There's risks associated with it as well, and perhaps issues. So again, you can see a number of different classes of how it links it together and brings that whole digital model together in one place. So this ontology now lets me really tie all this sets of information together in one place. Now that seems like, wow, that's a lot of information. But yeah, that's what you're doing as a system engineer, gathering lots of information. You're trying to consolidate it. You're trying to abstract it, and then you want to make it more understandable to everybody who's going to be able to view it. And that's not just engineers, of course. You've got the lawyers, the accountants, the program management, senior leadership management, on and on and on. Many different people have to have understanding of what's going into your system design. So how can we implement this language? Well, of course, LML, Innoslate already uses LML and has since its beginning. It is, of course, available to any other tool that's has the ability to extend their schema or adjust their schema or if they don't have any schema, use this as the basic schema. So you can do that. Innoslate for us has acted not only as a commercial tool that we use and sell, but and use it ourselves for our contract work, but it acts as a test bed as well for the language and a research tool. One of the reasons we make it available for free to the educational community is for that purpose, so they can use it and help us extend the research area of systems engineering into better ways that we can provide systems engineering support to the community. The test center itself again brings that test suites together into a dashboard, and also then you can roll up results as well, as you see here. So this is one of the test suites in the test center that you're seeing the different parts of it coming together. So this roll up lets you see that what's happened at each level, and then you can sign off on each level. If one part fails, it really the overall has failed. So you can run multiple test cycles with this, and so now I can create different releases of it. What Innoslate will do is when you create a test cycle, it will clear out the actual result and put the status back to unrun, not run. So again, that's part of the test cycling that makes it a little bit different than baselining a document, but it's very similar to the idea of baselining a document. So again, building the test cases early in the life cycle is going to cost money. I mean, this is one of the things people say, oh, well, I can't afford to do that. It's out of scope, on and on and on. There's lots of excuses we use for that. But how do you know your requirements verifiable unless you've actually created a test case? I think it's very difficult. And so, we're going to talk a little more about that. So how can we create verifiable requirements? And to this, we need to be able to answer, can the requirement be met? Are we going to use analysis, demonstration, inspection, modeling, simulation, or test to actually do the validation? Maybe it's a combination of those things even. And then will the user accept the results? These are all things you're looking for. And of course, you're going to worry about wordage. How do you make sure it's a clear, quantifiable requirement? So it's something that I can go out and measure and make sure it's understandable. And even suitability can be quantified. Suitability is kind of more of a thing where you often may use a survey or something like that of the users and say, did this meet your needs? And ask them, probing questions about their experience with it, that whole human-machine interface experience, and how does that work? That I know I worked with some operational test and evaluation folks, and they actually had a full-time PhD psychologist who would help to design those kind of surveys to make sure they were gathering the right information and quantifying it. So our quality checker uses AI NLP technology to help you do this and inspects the requirements. And one of the parameters it looks for particularly is verifiability. So when you run the quality checker, you see a quality score on the dashboard, but the attributes have the specific returns. And so in this particular case, it detected an ambiguity. In fact, there was appropriate and all. So in fact, there's two ambiguities in it. So those are kind of mushy words, right? So it make it, you're not really quite sure, how do I quantify all, and how do I quantify appropriate? So again, it meets some particular criteria to be appropriate. All meaning all the structural components. Again, maybe the all is okay in this case. You have to just make these decisions yourself as to whether you think that's good enough to make it clear as to whether it's a good requirement or not. But again, you still don't know 100% sure it's verifiable at this point in time, do you? So again, you might want to think about that, adding that test case, which we'll talk about in a minute. Oh, by the way, yeah, here's the blow up of that, the verifiable, in case you want to see that more. Okay, so how can we implement the language? Well, first of all, create a V&V test plan is another thing we can do. To do that, we go ahead and go to Documents View, and we select New Document, And in there, there's a document type already built in called test plan, okay? And then from that, you can choose a blank template, or if you've got templates uploaded, you've created. I don't think we have any templates for it, but if you have a test planning template you want to use or you reuse a lot, you can create your own and add that here as well, and you can choose that one. And then, of course, hit finish, and you go. And it'll generate the initial outline of the test plan for you, and you start building all that information in there. And of course, now you take other parts as you're doing things, you're getting these measures, your test cases, things like that can all be captured and used in that plan. So again, this becomes your live documentation. Another thing you could do is create the test model of the test process. By the way, since the test cases are a subclass of action, you actually use the action diagram itself to create this kind of a model. And so you can see what your inputs and outputs are as well. That's what the parallelograms are. And so I can track all that. And then I can add timing, I can add costs, I can simulate it. So now I can get more detailed plans. I could run Monte Carlo even if I don't know exact numbers for these kinds of things, and get a range and get an idea of how much my risk is. So again, this becomes part of that test plan that you're working with to create that, where am I going and what am I doing with it. So the bottom line of that is that basically use of the test case, the subclass, lets us perform that dynamic analysis of test planning. So how can we implement the language? Again, there's a lot more that can be done. You know, it's not just these simple aspects. You can do things like capturing what your test equipment looks like in your facilities. You can diagram those, maybe create an asset diagram showing how all that works together. That's really important, particularly too, if you're going to have to build test equipment. Let's say you have to create new automated test equipment. Well, that's a whole nother development work that has to be done on the side. And so again, you'd want to take many of these same kind of processes, trace it back to why do I need that? You know, all these things so that you can show and justify spending the money where it needs to be spent. Also, you can model your test organization. We use assets again for organization. People are assets as well. So again, it lets you to create your organizational elements that way. You can also identify roles and responsibilities. You might want to capture those as statements. That's a good way to capture that kind of thing. And again, that might be also part of your documentation as you're developing it in your test plan. Risks and risk mitigations, of course, we have risk analysis, risk matrices, risk burn down charts. So again, that's another aspect of testing that's pretty important. Criteria, of course, what are your actual MOEs, MOPs, your TPMs, all these things that you're going to measure, these metrics, and making sure you can capture those. So you can capture those as measure classes, a subclass of characteristics, or maybe it's characteristics in general, depending on what you're doing. Some things you're checking on, maybe a particular color of paint might be something that's important, like paint it gray. What's the color gray mean? Into the Navy, it has a very specific type of gray that's used on the ships that meets their requirements. And so you have to make sure you capture exactly that, and that's a measure or a characteristic depending on how you want to use it. For scheduling, we've got timelines, Kanban boards, Gantt charts, and of course, the output of the discrete event simulator and Monte Carlo simulators, actually, you can output Gantt charts as well. So it does help you do that analysis as well with it. Again, if you use your test cases as part of that becomes automatic as part of the output. And of course, you can associate costs with anything. And again, we want to be able to track those costs because tests is going to cost a lot of money. You got to make sure you're getting the bang for the buck you're looking for. Of course, the actual data capture itself, you can capture those as measures and times if you want, or if you've created, and we have the ability now to upload, rather than creating individual measure and time entity classes, you can actually bring a whole package of data together in our XY plot. So there's some nice ways to use that information. And if nothing else, you can store it as an artifact. You can always capture those files as artifacts. There's also a file attribute. So let's say each one of those test cases you have has a file associated with it. You might want to add the file attribute to the test case for that purpose. And I'll show you some of those in a minute. Location, okay, that's important. Where is it physically located? Where are the things physically located I'm testing? I might want to be able to track that. That might become very important to a lot of my decision making. And of course, the decisions themselves. And where a place where you can capture all the assumptions and things like that as well in the decisions entity. So you can see all these different things fit into verification validation. So there's so much data we're trying to collect and understand and curate as we work through this whole development cycle. So you can see even if you're early in the process, you're starting to think about, well, how am I going to do this? You start building these things incrementally. And then as you do that, then you won't miss things. So the bottom line is, Innoslate provides an integrated environment needed to connect all parts of the life cycle. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give you all the things you need to do to bring all this data together and create real information so better decisions can be made. So how does this provide for that T&E continuum we talked about? Well, we've particularly integrated with things like, we've had customers integrate with LabVIEW. That's this dynamic hardware in the loop testing. We're actually talking to them a little bit about what can we do with that, more of that integration. We've also recently interfaced Innoslate with Selenium. That's our software testing tool I mentioned a little bit earlier. We have 10,000 automated tests, and we used to track them by spreadsheet until we created this interface. So now when we run the test, it'll update the status tracking, and then as we run test cycles, we'll get the new test cycles and be able to run it again. So now we took something that was a multi-day process and converted it into the single time that we need to actually execute the test. And it pretty much does the documentation as we go. So that's exciting. And I think people are going to see that as being something very useful in the future. We already have found it useful. So again, with this integration, we've created this seamless interface between the systems engineering and the software engineering. And that's an important capability to do. We've done the same thing with GitHub on the actual development cycle side of it as well. So we have a very strong integration with software development now between systems and software. And we've created a good line between the two groups. Everybody has their own discipline and does their own things well. If we can figure out how to make them work together and orchestrate them, then we really save a lot. We're going to save a lot of time and money and have a much better product at the end of it. Okay, so how does it provide? Again, we'll talk a little bit more about this. So right now, primary purpose of the V, in fact, if you didn't know this, was it was to remind you that you're supposed to be doing things on the left-hand side as you're coming down the V that you need for the right-hand side. And particularly that always meant creating the requirements for the tested evaluation. Okay, so those would be your unit test, your operational test evaluation, your developmental test evaluation, your unit test requirement. All those things were requirements. So that was all requirements focus. So you wrote them just as pure requirements. The idea that we're moving to try to go to is instead of requirements, why don't we just build test cases? So instead, see, the classic specification was section 3 was the requirements, section 4 was the verification requirements. Well, rather than doing that, why don't I just get rid of those? Don't worry about the verification requirements. Tell me how I'm going to verify it using test cases. If I do that, then I've shortcutted that extra step that was created as a buffer between the test community and the requirements community, because there was a feeling like, well, you don't want the same people developing the requirements to do the testing. Well, maybe you do. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But in general, I think you want them to be at least communicating with each other. And what's the best way to communicate? Well, have them build the test cases. And in fact, if you have that other group you're going to go work with, why don't you bring them in early and have them be part of it now? And then that way you can really, again, when it comes time to testing, they'll be ready and they'll be able to do a good job of testing to make sure the development was done correctly. By the way, that is the current software engineering practice. The best practices for software today is they write the code and then they write the automated test case for the code at the same time, or as close as they could to it. That way they don't forget important things with it. And you really, again, speed up the whole process tremendously. We've brought our testing down from instead of 2 weeks to a matter of a few days. So with those 10,000 automated tests, makes a big, big difference. Okay, so how does this provide for that T&E continuum again? So again, if we can do this earlier in the process, we can use simulation to help predict test results. That's a key part of what we want to do. So using that, we can use our modern tools to help us understand and conduct that. So we have the ability to integrate with things like Systems Toolkit, STK, and MATLAB. And so now you sort of bring your design engineering tools together, at least the results of those design engineering tools together in one place, create that integrated simulation, and be able to now create a really true digital twin of your system. Now, by the way, there has been a interesting effort by that same group. They were developing something called a hackathon for an integrated decision support key. And the idea was to basically create the information base that was needed by going through and integrating a number of different tools. We've proposed that we help do that. They were using Cameo for one of their ways to do it, but they also don't want vendor lock. And so we were offering to provide a new cloud environment version of this. And since we already have a number of these integrations already done, we're pretty much ready to go for that. The only thing we hadn't done completely is integrate with Ansys Model Center, but we're in the process of doing that. So that hopefully will be in the very near future. So I'm gonna just stop for a minute and kind of show you a little bit more about the tool and show you a couple other things that are interesting. Let me get to here, there we go. Get to the right thing at first. So I mentioned Test Center. So let me start there. So here's the Test Center, and you have a set of test suites, and you can just add new test suites, is right here. If you want to make sure you have the latest and greatest one pinned up here at the top, that's adding a widget, and that would be simply adding the test suite card, and that would put the test suite that you're interested in most here, and so you could add those as you needed to. So let me just click on that one. By the way, notice this has a diagram built into it, so this is actually a diagram of this set of test cases as well. So that's an interesting part of it. Looks like somebody had just renumbered it on me, and so I no longer have TCs on here, which is interesting. Anyway, so the scrolling through here, here's my different test cases. Now these are really pretty nice connections to things. I can look and see how they're related to different requirements by looking at the relationships tab. And I can see what it verifies. It verifies this requirement here, appropriate markings. That's one way I could look at it. Of course, that's the hard way. Let's try an easier way. Let's open up a traceability matrix. And there it is. So this is you're looking at my verification requirements here at the top. If I again hover over any cell, I see the name, number, description of that cell. So this is a way you can go through and add things. We do have a checker for this as well. It's over here. Here's a traceability assist. So that's telling me there's good probability that these two are connected. If I look at that helium tank inspection, yeah, there's a lot of overlap in language between the two. Remember, it's only looking at language. It's not smart. There's no brilliance here. This is just looking at words and saying, do I have the right kind of words? Are they coming together? And what's the probability that these two things should be connected to each other? Doesn't mean that that's right. It just means that that's a high probability. So you have to look at it and be suspicious. And of course, there's a suspect check as well, which is giving you the inverse. Now, you look at this next one down from the one that was very green to now very red. So what's the difference? Well, there's nothing in the description field. So this test case hasn't been fleshed out yet. So now I have nothing that would connect this to that. If I say, well, I do want to make sure I do that as I'm doing that test case, then I need to make sure I add some steps in there to ensure that I do that function, that I meet that requirement. So again, this can be helpful in you in developing your connections, not just telling you what should be connected to each other. What else can I show you with this? And then of course I mentioned the documents and test plans. So here's an example test plan. This actually looks like there was a template for it. So there was a template that was applied. And again, you see that same process, test process we just saw before, also showing up here. Risks and other things too. So again, you can use this to, there's a chart, XY chart, risk burn down chart. So again, you can add the different charts and things and flesh this out as you go. So this is again how you can simultaneously be developing the requirements and your test planning and your test cases, and not just make them TBDs. One other thing that I found very interesting, let me go back to documents view. So I did have a set of verification requirements in this case. And since we just integrated with ChatGPT, I was playing around with it. And so I just clicked this bot here. And what it did, it puts in the chat window the verification requirement. Now, I didn't know much about how this works, so I just hit return. And so I wait a few minutes here. It takes a few seconds to think. And so it's going off and it's now telling me how to get ready for this and setting up the vibration table and instruments and all kinds of things that I might find very interesting in building my test case. So again, now I take this information, I can put it into the test case and link it together there, and you know, maybe that'll help me create these kinds of things. So again, this Chat GPT is new. I do recommend you be careful with it. We have tailored it also to our help center, so you can ask it questions like, how do I add cost to a model? And so it's using the information that's in our help center to go through and answer this question. So again, good general information. And then one more AI assistant is here. This is the actual one. So now this is one that I could go check the more. Like, what is requirements analysis? So again, it gives me some definitions of things. So again, I can use this to help me build things, understand things better, do analysis. So this this whole generative AI has a great promise. We're still researching it. We want to make sure we ultimately end up with one that's acceptable to people and have it be able to be put behind your own firewall and working with and keep your data private. So we are very cognizant of that. So if you do have a problem or an issue with ChatGPT at the moment, make sure you don't use the cloud version of the tool. Get our enterprise version, and we can. It has the ability to disconnect from ChatGPT. Okay, so I think that's the main things I had for today. Let me just hit the summary chart, and we'll open time for questions. So basically, I think LML gives you that ontology. You're looking to connect the dots between systems engineering and test evaluation today. We don't have to wait for something new or special. It's already here. We tested this with a number of organizations inside and outside the Department of Defense, so it's usable in a variety of different contexts. the Angular can be implemented with any tool with an open database schema. Again, I want to reiterate that it's not proprietary language. So you're certainly welcome to use it other places. And maybe that can help us with some of the data migration problems we have. That's something I'm really hoping for as well with this. And it's really not, in our feeling, it's time to move beyond the diagrams and focus on the data. That's where we can attain true interoperability between these tools, and we need that badly. Okay, so that's kind of my pitch today. Are any questions, Taylor?
Yes, we've received several already, and if you haven't done so, please send your questions through the panel on the right. Dr. Dam will answer as many as he can before our time is up. So the first is, how can you tie together the process modeling to the verification and validation process?
Yeah, I kind of showed that a little bit earlier with the fact that the test center elements themselves are, we get back to the test center here, are subclass of action. So I can go now and select this and open an action diagram. And so now here are my test cases. And so there they are, and my test teams. So again, this is my model. I can simulate it. I could end up with cost information if I've loaded cost in here. I don't think I have, but those kinds of things are here. And then of course, decompositions here available as well. All those steps are here. So again, I think that links those two together pretty nicely.
Fantastic. What tools can be integrated into the test center?
So right now, Selenium is the main one we use, and the other was LabVIEW. Again, somebody else did the LabVIEW integration. We've not done that ourselves. We're looking into making that more available. But I actually saw a very sweet integration that was done by Dr. Jerry Sellers at TSTI, and he did a very nice job with that. Of course, he's actually one of the experts in verification validation. That certainly one of the ones I listen to. Any other questions?
Can you create links from requirements to test?
Oh, yes. In fact, so that's actually what this was, the verification relationship that we use is verified by, verifies. So this test case verifies these verification requirements. So that's what those are. So those are links to the requirement. So I can go to that requirement by just selecting it and going right to it that way. Or again, I can go back and create that traceability matrix, which is a more elegant way of looking at all of them at once. And then I can look at those. I can use this to do development work. In fact, let's say I decide, well, I'm going to add appropriate markings here. You know, I could add some of the items that were the previous one by just going over to that one and clicking on it and adding it there. Or again, I could turn it off. I actually put on. So I would add that information right here. So again, I can use this to development work on the, and then once I finish, it will show up immediately in the test cases as well. So.
Great. That looks like all the questions we have. Did you want to make any last notes before I close this out?
Nope. I'm good. I'm going to bring back up the slide.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dr. Dam, and we'd like to thank you for joining us again today. As a reminder, we'll be following up with you very soon to send you a link to the recording and the presentation slide deck. We hope you can join us for our next webinar, Santa as a Systems Engineer, on Tuesday, December 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Spec engineers Dominic Galarza, Amir Abrari, Chris Howard will merrily demonstrate all the ways Santa plans for the big day using Innoslate throughout the entire life cycle. Be sure to register whether you can make it or not to receive the slides and recording. We also encourage you to visit our website and our blog, as well as connect with us on social media. That concludes today's presentation. Have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.